About 87 engineers and experts are on their way to try to rescue dysfunctional municipalities. But will this intervention announced by Minister William Khoza address the core issues facing local government? Let's discuss this with local government expert Paul Berkowitz and Executive Director at OUTA on Local Governance, Makhosi Khoza. Thanks so much for your time, guys. Appreciate it. Let's start with you, Makhosi, about this new move by government. Is it actually going to address the core issues facing these municipalities or not?
Well, first of all, I think we need to welcome that intervention by the minister. However, as OUTA, we are very disappointed by the fact that the national and provincial government has consistently left out the very important component of what constitutes a municipality in South Africa, and that is communities. And they are going ahead with this. And again, we don't think that they are dealing with the root causes of what collapsed municipalities in the first place, which is corruption. And in the minister's statement, there wasn't any indication that was showing us that there is seriousness in terms of rooting out the corruption at local government level. And therefore, we are saying to the minister, we still want to engage with him because we think the component of community is a very important component, especially because local government is really about the people. You cannot go with an intervention ahead without involving the communities. And we've been requesting meetings with the minister since April. Up until now, the minister is too busy for civil society, is too busy for communities.
Yeah, too busy sending experts in to do the work of municipalities. They're supposed to be doing it themselves, as far as I'm concerned. Now we have about 87 experts going in to do their jobs which they are being paid for, Paul. I mean, how does this work?
It's a good question. I think it's fair to point out that the municipalities that are being targeted are the poorest and the most rural and the least capacitated. And that being said, yes, there's no easy answer for saying why is government in effect paying twice for the same things. But it's a fact that some of the municipalities have had trouble attracting and retaining skilled engineers and technicians and quantity surveyors, partly because young, ambitious graduates want to work in metros and that they prefer to work in exciting places near to the bright lights. That being said, the idea, as the minister has said, and we'll have to see if it comes to fruition, is that these task teams and the experts will be building capacity to, I guess, ideally save the municipalities money in the future.
But Makhosi raises a good point. We're not addressing the issue of corruption, which is why many of these municipalities are in the current position. Should that not be the case with this?
It should be the case. If we look at the minister's press statement yesterday, he did say that the capacity building that was the focus of his speech and that's been the focus of the analysis to date is just one of the three areas where his task team and his efforts are targeted, and one of the other two is governance and administrative issues. So presumably that is about tackling the corruption. One possible outcome of this, of these task teams being sent by national government and with all aspects of the infrastructure spending and the supply chain, in a sense, almost being re-centralized, is that indirectly, possibly, it'll make it a lot harder, at least in the medium term, for anyone who wants to engage in maladministration and corruption to do so with National Treasury and National Cogta looking over their shoulder.
Makhosi, would you say that these municipalities are failing so dismally because they know that there's very little, watch over them on the part of provincial and national government? Absolutely.
National and provincial government has failed to perform an effective oversight function over the municipalities. And again, I'm afraid, to me, this Tumamina mantra is more like an election theatrics, you know, and it always happens. When it's before elections, these kind of interventions come, but the communities are left out. And what is more important is that it's not just the communities that are left out. The ratepayers are left out. And the ratepayers are responsible for the financial viability of municipalities. How do you cancel them out of the equation? You need to be factoring them in the equation. I mean, we have municipalities such as Mfuleni, and they are not in those municipalities. And Mfuleni is under administration. Sewer is overflowing everywhere. But in the list, I did not see Mfuleni municipality. And these are the municipalities that we are dealing with on a daily basis.
How does it get to that point, though, when there's a blatant disregard for how municipalities should function, for how things should be done, but it happens all the time?
Recycling of failure, and unfortunately, I'm going to call a spade a spade. The current minister himself, he knows. He was the premier of KZN. He was the chair of the ANC when the Mkungundlovu district municipality collapsed, when the Pietermaritzburg Umsunduzi municipality collapsed, and those people, what happened with them? Under his watch, they were redeployed to other positions. As we speak today, they are either MECs or they are holding some very high positions in government. So there is a tendency to recycle failure. And that is what we need to deal with. These cosmetic changes that are election theatrics, they need to go beyond that. We need now to have communities involved in the interventions that national government and provincial governments are initiating at municipal level.
Paul, would you agree with that recycling failure? Because you're going to have these experts who are going to go in, try to train people, try to tell them how to turn things over. But if they don't want to do it the way it should have been done in the first place, is that ultimately going to work?
So if we look at reasons to be cheerful or potentially optimistic, what we've seen this year at least is two changes to important pieces of legislation which may bear or may not bear fruit. As Dr. Khoza says, it all comes down to political will. What we've seen with the Auditor General's reports is that at the same time there was an announcement that the National Audit Act would be amended so that the Auditor General and his team could actually suggest prosecutions and criminal prosecutions for individuals that were attached to maladministration or the misappropriation of funds. Now that's good because that's an independent body, a much more independent body that sits adjacent to the three spheres of government that can have a say and can introduce some independence. The other thing that the minister said yesterday, and again, it may be talk, it has to be matched by political will, is that there was now going to be a national database and there won't be this recycling of corrupt municipal managers or CFOs anymore. That if someone decides to resign before a disciplinary process can be effected against them, they're not going to resurface in some obscure municipality. But the proof of the pudding, as the cliche goes, we'll see if there are prosecutions and for whom, and if politically connected people are going to be affected by the law the same way that other people are, that other municipal managers.
The reality is in South Africa, Makhosi, and you would know this as previously being a member of parliament, we have lots of legislation. We have lots of rules for people to follow. We have lots of consequences for people who don't follow those rules. But the nonsense and dodginess still happens.
And it's still going to happen as long as you are defining out communities, especially ratepayers and local businesses, from the processes of ensuring that municipalities are sustainable. Even these initiatives, I'm very afraid, I don't see them becoming successful. And again, we must remember, this whole thing of recycling failure is not something that is going to be easy to deal with, because even some of the MECs that are supposed to be overseeing municipalities are implicated in this corruption, in municipal corruption, and they are also implicated in the collapse of municipalities.
Now, Paul, communities, Makhosi mentioned it, people have been left out of this. why are we not seeing communities actually take a stronger stand against the corruption and failure in municipalities?
I think there's one or two reasons, and some are more historical than others. And this is not recent, there was a collapse of ward councils that goes back more than a decade. And structures like that, which are an important interface between communities and other political structures in the municipalities, those don't seem to exist. In a lot of municipalities where the ANC or the DA has an overwhelming majority, there's maybe even more of a disconnect between communities and the dominant parties, because sometimes the incumbents feel that they don't really need to consult too closely with communities. I think it may be a general problem, not just limited to local government, that there's a disconnect between the communities and the politicians that are supposed to represent them.
All right, thank you so much for your time. We have run out of time, unfortunately. I appreciate it.
All right.